if I work backwards, what took place in September was a big international conference on Somalia where a compact was endorsed. And the compact is part of the New Deal process. And at the end of the day, the compact brings together the priorities identified for each of the peace and state building goals and how are we going to work our way towards getting to those priorities. Now, before we got to the compact, it involved a huge amount of work in Somalia and in Nairobi between the international partners and the Somali federal government. So my role in this whole endeavor, let's call it, was providing headquarter support to the EU team, which is based in Nairobi, but which is working on Somalia. And since about the end of April, right until the 16th of September, we were as lead donor for the international community in virtually daily consultations with the government, civil society, the Somali parliament, regions in Somalia, in trying to shape and define this compact. So the compact has basically three main chapters. The first one is setting out where is Somalia, what was the process of actually getting to the document, this compact, and what does this all mean? The second part of the compact identifies the priorities for the peace and state building goals. It looks at inclusive politics, security, justice, economic foundations, and revenue and services. Those are the 5 PSGs. And so for each of those 5 PSGs, through special working groups, which each time had the same type of participants, you had internationals and Somalis, and within Somalis, it's government, parliament, civil society. We identified the top 3 priorities for each of the peace and state building goals. So for security, we have 3 priorities, and then within those 3 priorities, you will see that we have worked out some milestones which we want to achieve in 2014. And so my part of the compact process was to work behind the scenes as a technical advisor together with people from the World Bank and the UN, advising on the working groups, advising the EU ambassador, the EU member states, talking to the Somalis on how do we go about putting in place this compact. I think it's fair to say that increasingly people have become aware that there is a duality between security and development. Without security, it's very difficult to do development, and without development, it will be more difficult to actually reach a secure and stable state. So the two go hand in hand. And if you look at Somalia over the past 20 odd years, it's been a brilliant example, unfortunately, of insecurity and instability. Now, the window of opportunity which allowed us to do this New Deal process was, on the one hand, an increase in the security situation. There was a bit more stability starting to take place in Somalia, mainly through the amazing work which is being done by the African Union Peacekeeping Force, AMISOM, but also through the increased involvement of the Somali National Army and police forces, which the EU is supporting. And so, with a new government coming in place and this seeming positive trend on the security side, the New Deal and the Compact were an opportune element to bring to the table. This having been said, security is primordial and we can't really do anything without security. And if you look at the EU's intervention, we are of course very involved in humanitarian issues and classical development implementation. But we also have 3 CSDP missions ongoing. We have a CSDP mission off the coast of Somalia, which is supporting the World Food Programme's shipments of food into Somalia and interdicting piracy. We have a mission recently now, which was in Uganda and is now in Somalia, training the Somali armed forces. And the third mission is more of a regional mission, which is training and capacity building of the maritime forces of Djibouti, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania. So we have those 3 CSDP missions on top of what we're doing in development and humanitarian. And all of these things together are leading towards Somalia becoming a more stable and more secure country. But we still have a long way to go. And by focusing our attention on these top key priorities between 2014 and 2016, we hope that the situation will become better and that Somalia itself will be able to assume responsibility for its own internal security, and that AMISOM as I mentioned, starts to play a smaller role, and at the end of the day, we don't need African peacekeepers there anymore. A second very important chapter of the compact is what is called the aid principles, which is where we spell out what the development partners are going to be doing in terms of no longer doing business as usual. How are we going to use the country systems more often? How are we going to ease our development cooperation with, how are we going to diminish the duplication, how are we going to increase coordination, etc. And this has direct implications on how DevCo works in Somalia. Because at the end of the day, what we are seeing now is a plethora of interventions from the EU side, the member state side, and others going into Somalia, making it virtually impossible to track what is happening. And part of the compact means let's try and bring it all together and more structured so that we can actually see who is doing what, so that the Somali government feels more ownership and starts being able to deliver itself on the ground to its people. So a direct consequence of the compact for DevCo is that, first of all, we need to see whether our 11th European Development Fund cooperation with Somalia, if the 3 sectors that have been identified fit into the compact's priorities. Now, we've already been doing the internal exercise, and it seems that there isn't a contradiction. So our 11th EDF programming will be fully in line with the compact's priorities. That's the first step. The second step is that we also need to look at what are we doing with the non-EDF flows into the country. We have thematic budget lines like EIDHR, we have non-state actor support, we have issues on water, etc. We need to make sure that whenever we are doing an intervention through that, it also at least doesn't contradict what is in the compact. A key element of the compact is also, as I mentioned, that we want to diminish the number of flows of development into the system. And one of the things that we are strongly working with the World Bank and the UN on is the putting together of what is called multi-partner donor funds, which at the end of the day means that there will be donors coming together under one package aimed at specific elements. Rather than 20 different contracts being signed, we'll have several big ones all coming in through the same door. This all in the hope of simplifying life for the Somalis. If you look at it from the consequences for the EU, the compact of course involves a lot of development related issues, but it also looks at politics and security. So one of the issues that needs to happen within the EU family is, what does this mean for the 3 CSDP missions who are working in the security field? What does it mean for the political outreach? We are diplomats as well, so how do the EU member states and how does the EU delegation to Somalia deal with the political implications of what is in the compact? So all this to say that in the next few weeks we will have internal DevCo discussions to take this forward, the compact, and then in a second stage we will need to have a discussion with the wider EU family. We now have a compact. What does the EAS do about this? What do the CSDP structures do about that? And how can we bring it all together so that we have the true comprehensive approach of the EU towards Somalia? When in April the New Deal process was launched in Somalia, right from the beginning, the EU was very keen to be taking a leading role. So we assumed this lofty title of the lead donor for the compact, which in essence means that the EU represented the international community in the high-level task force for the New Deal. In this high-level task force, this was the forum in which the Office of the Presidency, the Office of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of Finance, the UN and the EU sat together to map out what has to happen between now and the 16th of September to get to a robust and good compact. And this of course required a huge amount of work from the EU. As such, myself from the Fragility and Crisis Management Unit was seconded, as it were, to the geographic unit in DevCo, and I went down to Somalia and Nairobi for nearly 13 weeks of extended mission. My colleague, there was a colleague also from the European External Action Service from the Somali desk who was also sent down to Nairobi to help. And the Somalia mission in Nairobi was of course fully mobilized. So between April and September, there was a huge team effort of the team down there and ourselves from headquarters, supported by the hierarchy on both sides, working to get to the September conference. This involved, as I said, working at technical level behind the scenes, but of course the EU ambassador having meetings with the president, with the ministers, with other heads of mission in Nairobi, in Mogadishu, to make sure that everybody is on the same wavelength. And we also had core meetings where we had senior management, our Deputy Director General, the Managing Director General for Africa from the EAS side, going down to Mogadishu for meetings with the President, the Prime Minister, the ministers, etc., just to make sure that everything was on track, that people knew what we were trying to achieve, and to keep the momentum going. Because momentum is a very important one, and once you start losing this momentum, it's easy to see the whole process fizzling out. So it was very good that we had high level support. Well, right from the beginning, what we made clear to everybody is that whatever product came out of this, and it's the compact, it was going to be a living document, a document which isn't fixed and that's it, we're not touching it anymore. Because the situation changes and evolves, we would have to revisit the content and the priorities over time. And one of the key issues of it also being a living document is that, of course, it continues, and this means that the Somalis have to take this and run with it, which explains also why from the beginning we didn't just want to have a discussion between us and the government, but it had to involve a wider community on the Somali part. And part of the New Deal philosophy is exactly that. You are talking to, yes, a fragile country and the government, but also the people behind that government. So civil society has to play a very big role in the whole process. And not just civil society, but also parliament, because at the end of the day, they also represent the people. So one of the very big challenges in the early stages of the process was to convince the government in how do we bring on board civil society actors and parliament in all these working groups, because it was all over the shop. And it worked out quite well, because we had participation from parliament in peace and state building goals. Civil society was always present in the high-level task force that I mentioned earlier. This having been said, next to the discussions taking place on the compact, we also initiated a fragility assessment. And the fragility assessment is also part of the discourse of the New Deal. And it involves, in essence, the country carrying out a, let's call it, self-assessment of where they are in terms of fragility. It's looking at the 5 peace and state building goals and asking themselves, where are we and how are we doing on security, on justice, etc., and what could be ways to improve the situation. And so this exercise of the fragility assessment, which is very much owned by the government, was taking place in parallel to the discussions on the compact's content. And there you can see virtual total ownership on behalf of the Somalis. Of course, it's very difficult to access all parts of Somalia because of the security issues. So for the fragility assessment, we were only able to carry out, I think it was 4 or 5 regional workshops of 2 days each time, covering at least some of the key cities in Somalia, each time looking for the same answers. What are we, where are we in terms of fragility, and what do you think we should be doing? And part of this ongoing process of the New Deal is, okay, we have the compact, which was taking into consideration what was coming out of the fragility assessment workshops, but these workshops will continue. They are continuing now. In the next few months, there will be continuous workshops in other parts of the country asking the same question: what about fragility? What should we do? How can we do it better? And at the same time, here is the compact. Knowing it's a living compact, what do you think of its contents? Do you agree with the priorities? If not, maybe we can tweak it here and there. And so we can see a clear role for civil society in participating in these fragility assessments and playing the role of watchdog, as it were, in terms of we've committed ourselves, the international community, to X, Y, Z principles in the compact. Civil society can play a role to say, aha, you, the internationals, you said you were going to be doing this, but you haven't. Why are you not doing it? And the same, the civil society can also hold the government to account, because the Somali government has said, we will be doing X, Y, Z. So again, the civil society in Somalia has a role of keeping track and making sure that what we have committed to is actually being done.